The cake said, "Our hero." My mother pointed the knife at me and smiled. This one mops floors." 19 relatives laughed on cue. For years, I was her cautionary tale. Proof she'd raised one winner and one waste. Diane was her trophy, the surgeon in the paper, the daughter she could wear. Me, she sat by the trash bags and told to refill the ice. 11 years I let her carve me up in public. I never argued. Tonight I set down the plate she shoved at me. "Lovely photo of Diane," I said. "Shame it's only half true." The table chuckled, waiting for the joke. Diane didn't. Diane had gone white to the lips. Because my sister was the only one who could finish that sentence, and she'd just realized I could too. I'm Ottilie, 41 years old, the daughter who, my mother likes to say, cleans up after other people for a living. She isn't entirely wrong about that. She's only wrong about which building, which floor, and whose life is in my hands when I do it. Let me take you back to the start of that night, because you need to see exactly how far she was willing to go before I said a single word. The party was at my mother's house in Bellhaven, the one Diane paid the mortgage on. Loretta had strung the porch with the little white lights she saves for church socials. She'd printed the newspaper photo poster size and mounted it on an easel by the door, where the coats went, where nobody could walk in without seeing it. "Local surgeon saves man's life." My sister's face under the headline, gloved hands still up, eyes bright above a pulled-down mask. She looked like a woman who had just decided the universe belonged to her. I got there at 6. I'd driven 40 minutes straight off a shift, and I still smelled faintly of the soap we scrub with, that sharp pink antiseptic that never quite washes out. My mother met me at the door with a look I've been getting since I was 7. A quick scan, top to bottom, filing me under a heading she decided on decades ago. "You could have dressed up," she said. I did. "Diane's fiancé's family is here. Try not to embarrass her." She said it lightly. That was always the trick with my mother. She could hand you the cruelest thing in the world with a smile so soft you'd feel rude for flinching. Inside, the house was full. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, the ones who only surface for weddings and funerals and moments of family glory. My Uncle Boyd stood by the fireplace holding court, thumbs in his belt, telling the story of the newspaper article as though he'd scrubbed in himself. Boyd had co-signed Diane's medical school loans years ago. He'd been dining out on it ever since. My niece by marriage was passing a tray. Someone had put on the kind of soft jazz you hear in dentist waiting rooms. Diane sat in the center of it all in a cream dress, glowing, letting people touch her arm and say the word. Doctor. Hero. Miracle. Her fiancé Preston stood behind her chair with his hand on her shoulder, like he was guarding a monument. Preston came from money and married the idea of a surgeon before he ever married the woman. You could see it in how he steered every conversation back to the article. Nobody stood up when I came in. That's the thing you learn early, being the one they've decided about. You stop expecting the room to turn. You come in through the side of it. You find the quiet corner. You make yourself useful so that your presence has a reason, because the family taught you a long time ago that you needed one. My mother handed me an apron, an actual apron, folded, still creased from the drawer. "The ice keeps running low," she said. "You know where everything is." I took it. I want to be honest with you about that. I took the apron, and I tied it on, and I carried the ice, because it was easier than the alternative, and because there was a part of me that still, at 41 years old, wanted to see if being useful would finally be enough for her. It never had been. But hope is a stubborn animal. It doesn't die just because you starve it. So I refilled the ice. I refilled the wine. I wiped a ring off the good table before my mother could see it, and blame me for the water and the fact that the table was old. I moved through my own family like staff, and the strangest part, the part I want you to understand, is that not one of those 19 people found it strange. To them, this was the natural order. Diane sat, Ottilie served. The sun came up in the east. Around 7, Aunt Colleen caught my wrist as I passed with the pitcher. Colleen is my mother's youngest sister, and she'd had a rough year. Some surgery in the spring she never talked about. Gallbladder, everyone assumed. The kind of thing you don't put on a poster. She looked up at me now with an expression I couldn't place. Not the usual pity, something searching. "Do I know you from somewhere?" she asked. Besides this." "I'm Ottilie," I said, Loretta's oldest. "I know who you are." She kept hold of my wrist. Her thumb pressed the base of my hand right over the callus, and something moved behind her eyes and then went still. Never mind. You just remind me of someone. I refilled her water and moved on before the feeling in my chest could turn into anything I'd have to manage. Here's what none of them knew, standing in that warm, bright room. 3 weeks earlier, at 10 minutes past 2 in the morning, a phone had rung in a call room at the hospital, and the voice on the other end had been my sister's, and she had been terrified. But I'm getting ahead of the night. Let me stay in the room a little longer because the room is where my mother decided to do the thing she did. At 8, she called for quiet by tapping the cake knife against her glass. The cake had arrived from the Good Bakery, white with gold letters. Our hero. She'd positioned it under the framed article, so both would be in every photograph. My mother has always understood staging. She'd have made a fine director if she'd been born into a family that told her she could be anything. Instead, she poured everything she had into one daughter and made a monument of her, and she needed the rest of us arranged around the base of it like ornamental stone. I want to say something about my girls, she began. I was standing by the sideboard with the ice bucket in my hands. Everybody knows Diane, Loretta said, and the room laughed warmly because everybody did. My Diane. Do you know when she was 6 years old, she told me she was going to save lives. 6. And she did it. She did exactly what she said. Her voice caught, real feeling in it, and I'll give her this. The love was genuine. That's what made it lethal. There was a man on that table who was not going to see morning, and my daughter brought him back. Applause. Preston squeezed Diane's shoulder. Diane dipped her head, modest, radiant. And then, my mother said, turning, finding me by the ice, there's my other one. The room turned with her. 19 faces swiveling toward the woman in the apron. She raised her glass. She was smiling. I want you to hold that image, the smile, because it matters later. One daughter saves lives, my mother said. The other one mops floors. And the room laughed. My Uncle Boyd laughed hardest, slapping his knee. Cousins laughed. Preston's parents laughed politely, the way you laugh at a joke you don't fully understand but assume is fond. Diane laughed too. That's the part I keep, if I'm honest. My sister, the doctor, the hero, laughing into her wine while our mother turned me into the evening's entertainment. I set the ice bucket down on the sideboard. I untied the apron. Nobody noticed yet. They were still enjoying the joke, wiping their eyes, refilling their glasses, and my mother was basking in it, glass still up, waiting for me to do what I always did, which was nothing, which was smile a small smile and disappear back into being useful. I looked at the framed photograph on the easel, my sister's bright eyes above the mask, the headline in bold. Lovely photo of Diane, I said. Shame it's only half true. The laughter thinned, the way laughter does when people can't tell if a new joke has started. My Uncle Boyd said, half true? And chuckled, ready to be amused. Diane didn't chuckle. Diane had set her glass down. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Because my sister was the only person in that room who knew there was a 2 in the morning, and she had just, in the space of one breath, begun to understand that I might know it too. If you've ever been the one they arranged the party around, not the one it was for, the one they needed standing in the shadow so the light would look brighter, you already know how this feels. Do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and which one you were in your family, the hero or the help. I read them all. Now let me tell you how my mother got here, because a woman doesn't build a monument on top of her own child by accident. She practices. My mother didn't wake up one morning and decide to hate me. It was slower than that, and quieter, and it started before I had words for it. We were poor in the specific way that families are poor when the money runs out, but the pride doesn't. My father left when I was 9 and Diane was 4, and after that, my mother had exactly one plan for surviving it, and the plan was Diane. Diane was the pretty one, the sweet one, the one who cried in a way that made adults want to fix the world for her. My mother looked at that little girl and saw a lottery ticket, and she was not wrong. She was just wrong about me. Because I was the practical one, the one who could be handed a thing. When the sink backed up, I fixed the sink. When Diane needed a ride to ballet, I walked her the 2 miles. When the electric bill came in red, I was 14 and I got a job. And the job I got, because it was the one job in Bellhaven that would hire a 14-year-old off the books, was a weekend cleaning shift at County General. That's the seed of it. That's where Mops Floors was planted. I did, in fact, mop floors. I cleaned rooms and stripped beds, and by 16, when a supervisor took a liking to me, I was on the overnight environmental crew that turned over the operating rooms between cases. I mopped the OR floor at 2 in the morning while the county slept. I was good at it. I was fast, and I was thorough, and I noticed things, and the scrub nurses started letting me stay in the doorway during turnovers to watch, because I asked questions that weren't stupid. My mother told people her daughter cleaned at the hospital. She said it the way you'd mention a cross you were bearing. Audley's over at county, cleaning. And she let the sentence do its work. Meanwhile, Diane was in the private academy 2 towns over on a scholarship my mother stretched and lied and borrowed to top up. And every dollar I brought home in a cleaning smock went into the machine that was building my sister. I want to be fair to Diane here, because this story has a turn in it, and I don't want you to hate her yet. Diane was a child. She didn't build the machine. She was raised inside it, told from the age of 6 that she was special, and that her specialness was fragile, and that everyone around her, me especially, existed to protect it. That does something to a person. It makes them believe the arrangement is natural. It makes them able to laugh at their sister at a party without ever quite feeling the knife go in. But I'm getting ahead again. Let me tell you the moment I left. I was 18. I'd gotten into the state university, pre-med, with enough scholarship and enough of my own saved cleaning money to make it possible if I lived like a monk. I told my mother at the kitchen table. I remember I was proud. I remember I thought for one stupid, hopeful second that she would be proud too. She said, "And who's going to help with Diane's tuition if you go off playing college?" That was it. That was the whole of it. Not congratulations. Not a single question about the school or the scholarship or the future I'd just described. Just the ledger. Just the accounting of what my leaving would cost the daughter who mattered. So I left. I packed a duffel bag and I left. And I didn't slam the door, because I'd learned by then that slamming doors only gave her a story to tell the aunts about how ungrateful I was. I closed it softly. I've closed a lot of things softly in my life. You'll see that it becomes relevant. The years after that, I'll give you fast, because that's how they felt. State university, pre-med, 3 jobs. A cleaning job again, because it was what I knew and it paid. And the hospital near campus took me because my references from county were solid. I scrubbed floors to pay for the education that would one day let me stand on them. Medical school on loans that still follow me around like a debt collector's shadow. A residency in trauma surgery that broke me down and built me back into something harder. A fellowship. 14-hour days, then 18, then the kind of nights where you forget what your own kitchen looks like. Somewhere in the middle of it, I met Sam Fletcher, who fixed the heating system in the residence building and asked me to dinner 4 times before I said yes because I didn't have 4 free evenings to give him. We married in a courthouse with 2 witnesses from the surgical floor. I took his name. Fletcher. I told myself it was because I liked how it sounded. The truth is uglier and simpler. I took his name because it was not my mother's, and because a small, cold part of me wanted a wall between the woman I was becoming and the family that had already decided who I was. My mother did not come to the wedding. She wasn't invited. Diane wasn't either. By then, we were the kind of estranged where birthdays pass in silence, and you hear the family news secondhand, months late, filtered through the one cousin who still emails. I heard Diane got into medical school. I heard it, and I sat in my car in a hospital parking garage and cried for reasons I couldn't have named cleanly. And then I went back inside and operated on a man who'd been shot in the abdomen, and my hands did not shake. That's the thing they never understood about me. My hands do not shake. It's the one gift the whole miserable arrangement gave me. When you grow up learning to stay calm while the person who's supposed to love you takes you apart, you develop a nervous system that does not spike. You get very, very steady. It turns out that steadiness is worth a great deal in an operating room at 2 in the morning when someone is bleeding out and everyone is looking at you to be the calmest person in the world. 4 months before the party, I came home. Not to Belhaven, to the region. The hospital system that runs County General and 3 others had lost its chief of surgery to a bigger city, and they came looking, and I was ready to stop moving. Sam wanted to be near his aging parents, and there was something else, something I only half admitted to myself, which was that Belhaven was 40 minutes down the highway, and my mother was getting old, and I am, God help me, still her daughter. So I took the job. Chief of Surgery. I signed the contract as Ottilie Fletcher, and not one person in my family knew, because I had spent 23 years making sure they couldn't find me, and it turns out walls work in both directions. I didn't know Diane was there. That's the part that still catches in my throat. I took the chief's job in March, and I did not know that my little sister had matched into the surgical residency at the very same hospital the summer before. Different campus for her first months, nights and rotations that didn't cross mine. And the thing that kept us apart even when the schedule didn't, the masks. I am always behind a mask when I'm anywhere near a case. Cap, loops, N95, the works. Diane had a chief named Dr. Fletcher, who existed to her as a signature on a schedule and a fearsome voice on the overnight consult line, and she never once thought to wonder if the initials might be the sister she'd been told cleaned floors for a living. Back at the party, my mother's smile was starting to curdle. "Half true?" she said. She let out a little laugh, inviting the room back into it. "Sweetheart, I don't know what you think you're—" "Refill on the Chardonnay over here," Boyd called, holding up an empty glass, not even looking at me. And 3 people laughed, and just like that my mother had her opening again. "You heard your uncle," she said to me. "Warm, soft, lethal. Make yourself useful. And here is where I have to tell you something honest about myself, because if I only show you the strong parts, you won't believe the rest. I almost did it. I almost picked up the bottle. 41 years old, chief of surgery at a level 2 trauma center, and my body still moved toward that wine bottle because my mother had used the voice, and the voice had been training me since before I could read. My hand actually lifted. Then I looked at Diane. My sister wasn't laughing anymore. She was staring at me across the room with a small vertical line between her brows, the exact expression I'd seen on 100 residents in the half-second before they understood something they didn't want to understand. Diane was doing math, and whatever the math was adding up to, it was draining the color out of her face 1 degree at a time. I put my hand back down. "Actually, Mom," I said, "I think I'll sit for this part." I pulled out a chair. I sat down at the table my mother had seated me away from, and 19 relatives went quiet, not because they understood anything yet, but because the one who always served had just sat down among them, and some animal part of the room knew that the natural order had, for the first time in anyone's memory, been disturbed. There's a piece of this I skipped, and I skipped it on purpose, because it's the one that still keeps me up. I want to tell you about the day I found out my sister worked for me. It was maybe 6 weeks before the party. I was doing what a chief does on a slow afternoon, which is paperwork, and I was signing off on the resident rotation schedule for the trauma service, page after page of names I was still learning. And there it was, halfway down the second years, Vane D. I stopped signing. Vane, my mother's name. My name, before I sanded it off. And a first initial that could have been anyone's, and was, I knew instantly, in my gut, before I'd finished the thought, not anyone's. I sat in my office with a pen in my hand, and I did the thing I tell my residents never to do, which is assume, and I pulled up the file, and there she was, Diane Vane, second-year surgical resident, date of birth. I'd have known blind, my little sister in my department, under my name, and she had no idea. I want you to sit in that with me for a second, because I sat in it for a long time. 23 years I'd spent building a wall between my life and my family. I'd changed my name, skipped the funerals, let the estrangement calcify. And the whole time, the universe had been quietly threading us back together. And now my sister, the golden child, the one they'd raised to look through me, was a scared second year on my service. And I was the fearsome anonymous authority she'd been warned about at orientation. I had, without knowing it, become the exact thing to Diane that my mother had spent our childhoods making me, the one you don't really see, the one who exists a level above or below you, the help or the tyrant, never the person. I could have called her in. I rehearsed it. "Diane, it's me. It's Ottilie. I'm your chief." I got as far as her name in the message system 3 separate times. I never sent it. Here's the ugly truth I owe you. I was afraid. 41 years old, a chief of surgery, a woman who does not flinch when an aorta lets go, and I was afraid of a 36-year-old resident because she was my sister, and because the last time my family had a chance to see the real me, they'd handed me a cleaning smock and told the neighbors. I was afraid that if I walked into that resident's life and said, "I'm your sister and I'm your boss," she would do what she'd been trained to do since she was 6, which was look at me with my mother's eyes and find me wanting. So I did the coward's version. I watched her from behind a mask. I made sure the good cases came her way. I answered when she called the overnight line, and I never said my first name. I mothered her from the shadows, exactly the way I'd once sent birthday money through a cousin, because loving my family from a hidden distance was the only way I'd ever learned to do it safely. Once, 3 weeks before the 2 a.m. call, we passed in a hallway. Both of us capped and masked, her going into a case, me coming out of one. She stepped aside for the chief the way residents do, eyes down, a quiet Dr. Fletcher, and I said doctor back, and our shoulders were maybe a foot apart. 2 sisters who'd shared a bedroom for 13 years, and neither of us knew. I got around the corner and I put my back against the wall and I breathed for a minute. I could have turned around. I could have said her name. The whole rest of this story would be different if I had. I didn't. I closed that door softly too. I'm telling you this so you don't think I'm the pure wronged hero of my own account. I'm not. My mother made me invisible, yes. But somewhere along the way, I picked up the habit and started doing it to myself. Choosing the shadow because the shadow was safe. Letting my family keep a lie because tearing it down meant standing in the light and being looked at. And being looked at was the most frightening thing I knew. It took my mother handing me a toy mop in front of 19 people to finally burn that out of me. Sometimes the thing that frees you is the exact thing that was supposed to break you. She meant that mop to put me in my place. Instead, it put me on my feet. So when I tell you I sat down at that table and said, "Shame, it's only half true," understand that it wasn't a plan. It was 23 years of closed doors finally refusing to close. It was a woman who'd hidden her whole life deciding in one specific second, with a pink plastic mop in her hand, that she was done being easy to overlook. So that was where we stood, 6 weeks out. My sister on my service, both of us behind masks, neither of us saying the word. And then, 3 weeks later, at 2 a.m, the phone rang, and the wall I'd spent 23 years building came down whether I wanted it to or not. You deserve to know what actually happened that night, the real version, before my mother turns it into anything else. 2 minutes past 2 a.m, I was in the chief's call room with my shoes off and my eyes closed, not asleep, just resting them, when the consult phone rang. Not my personal phone. The other one. The one the whole surgical service can reach when a case is going bad, and the resident on the floor needs someone above them, fast, and doesn't have time to be polite about the chain of command. I answered on the first ring, because that's the job. "Fletcher," I said. The voice that came back was young and stretched thin as wire. "This is Vane, 2nd year. I've got a 40-year-old male, highway pileup, splenic laceration we thought we had controlled, and now the pressure's in the basement. And there's blood in the field faster than I can suction, and I need," and then a breath that was almost a sob, "I need help. I'm losing him." Vane, my sister's name, before she was anybody's fiancée. Diane Vane. I heard it, and something in my chest did a thing I did not have time for. So I put it in a box and closed the box, the way you learn to, and I got very steady. "Talk to me," I said. "What have you packed?" She told me. She was doing the right things. She was doing them a beat too slow because she was terrified and alone, and the man was younger than the textbook version of this, and she had never held a life that was actively leaving her hands. I have. I've held dozens. So I did the thing you can only do when your own nervous system refuses to spike. I became the calm she didn't have. "I'm coming down," I said. "Keep pressure, don't chase the bleeding, pack all 4 quadrants, and do not let anyone move him. 2 minutes. I did not put on my shoes properly. I remember that. I remember running down 2 flights in half-tied shoes with my cap already going on, and I remember the smell of the OR as I pushed through the doors, that antiseptic sharpness that has been the perfume of my entire life, from a 14-year-old with a mop to a chief of surgery with a scalpel. Same smell, same floor. I have washed that floor and I have bled men out onto it and saved them, and I promise you it is the same floor. I scrubbed in beside a resident whose eyes above her mask were huge and wet and did not, in that light, in that panic, in that cap, recognize me at all. Why would she? She'd been told for 2 decades that her sister cleaned floors. She was looking at a chief named Fletcher. The last thing a drowning person does is look up and see a ghost. We worked. I found the bleeder she couldn't reach, a short gastric vessel torn behind the spleen, the kind of thing that hides exactly where a second year won't think to look, because a second year hasn't yet had it nearly kill 3 of her patients. I clamped it. I talked her through the repair with my hands over hers for part of it, and then I stepped back and let her finish, because she could once someone had stopped the drowning, and because a good chief knows when the teaching matters more than the ego. The man lived. His pressure came up. Diane closed him, and she cried a little behind her mask when it was done, the good kind of crying, and I told her, and I said it gently, I did, that was excellent work under pressure. You're going to be a real surgeon. And she said, thank you, Dr. Fletcher. And she never saw my face, and I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of the call room bed and put my head in my hands because I had just saved a man's life beside my little sister, and she did not know me. And I did not tell her, because what would I have said? I've closed a lot of things softly. The hospital's PR office called it a save. The local paper heard resident saves crash victim in dramatic overnight surgery, and ran with it, because a young woman surgeon is a better photograph than a middle-aged chief who wasn't on the byline. I let it happen. I'm a chief. Cases get credited to the surgeon of record, and building up a resident's confidence is part of the work. And I did not need my name in the Belhaven Courier. I thought, let the girl have her win. I did not know my mother would take the girl's win and beat me across the face with it in front of 19 people. So now you know what I knew, sitting at that table. I knew that the hero on the easel had 3 weeks earlier called me at 2 in the morning and said I'm losing him. I knew that the man in the headline was alive because the woman my mother called the floor mopper had run down 2 flights of stairs in untied shoes. And I knew that Diane, staring at me now with that vertical line deepening between her brows, was 3 or 4 connected thoughts away from knowing it too. Here's a question for you, and I mean it. Put your guess in the comments before you hear the rest. When my sister finally puts it together, what does she do? Does she protect the lie our mother built? The lie that made her the hero? Or does she tell the truth in front of everyone and set fire to her own monument? I genuinely wasn't sure. Tell me what you'd bet on. Then keep watching because it happened faster than I expected. Back at the table, my mother had recovered. My mother always recovers. She'd decided my sitting down was a tantrum, and she knew how to handle a tantrum because she'd been narrating my tantrums to this family since I was small. She gets like this, Loretta told the table, warm and confiding, patting Preston's mother on the hand. Ottilie's always had a jealous streak. It's not her fault. When you don't accomplish much yourself, it's hard to watch your sister shine. She looked at me with something that was almost tenderness, which was the cruelest weapon in her arsenal. We don't hold it against her. A few people made sympathetic noises. Poor, jealous Ottilie. Preston's father nodded like a man who'd been given useful context. I didn't take the bait. I've sat across from families screaming at me in waiting rooms. My mother's soft knife doesn't move my pulse the way it did when I was 10. But Diane made a sound. A small one. Half a word. Bitten off. Mom, she said. What, sweetheart? Diane opened her mouth, and I watched my sister stand at the edge of the truth, 1 foot over it, the whole warm, bright monument of her life waiting to see what she'd do. And I watched her lose her nerve. Nothing, she said. Never mind. She reached for her wine. Her hand wasn't steady. Mine, resting on the table, was perfectly still, and for the first time all night my mother noticed my hands, and her eyes narrowed, because a woman who mops floors has rough hands, but she does not have hands that quiet. My mother has a rule she's never said out loud, but has lived by my whole life. If the target won't break on the first hit, hit somewhere softer. She let the wine and the cake go around. She let the room warm back up. She was patient. She'd waited 41 years to be the mother of a surgeon, and she wasn't going to let one strange sentence from her useless daughter spoil the evening. So she waited until the plates were down and the coffee was out, and then she reached under her chair and brought up a gift bag. "Now," she announced. "I got a little something for Audley, too. I don't want her to feel left out." The table chuckled, primed. "Because I know how she is." She pulled it out slowly, milking it. A mop. A child's toy mop, pink plastic, the kind you'd buy for a 5-year-old who wants to help clean. She'd tied a bow on the handle. The room detonated. Boyd laughed so hard he had to set his coffee down. Cousins wheezed. Preston's mother covered her mouth, delighted to spite herself. My mother held the little pink mop out to me across the table with a smile so warm you could have mistaken it for love, and said, "For the professional. Don't say I never got you anything nice." I looked at the toy in her hand. I want to tell you it didn't land. It landed. 41 years old and a chief of surgery, and it went in like a blade between the ribs, because it wasn't the mop. It was the 19 faces around it laughing, and the one face in the newspaper photo on the easel, and my sister not laughing anymore, but not stopping it either, just staring at her plate, and my mother's warm eyes, and the whole engineered public certainty that this was who I was and always would be. The help, the joke, the cautionary tale. My phone buzzed in my bag. Not my personal phone. The other one. I felt it against my hip, that specific double pulse, and I knew before I looked that somewhere 40 minutes down the highway a case was going sideways and someone was reaching up the chain for the calmest person they could find. I let it buzz. I took the mop from my mother's hand because refusing it would have given her the tantrum she wanted, and I set it gently on the table next to the Our Hero cake. "Thank you," I said. "It's very thoughtful. And I meant to leave it there. I want you to know that." My plan, sitting at that table with a toy mop and a buzzing pager and a family laughing at me, was to say thank you, drive home, and let them keep their monument, because I had spent 23 years learning that the only way to win with my mother was to stop playing. That was the plan. Then Aunt Colleen spoke up. "Loretta," she said slowly from the end of the table. She'd been quiet a long time. She was looking at my hands where I'd set the mop down, the callus at the base of my palm, the way I'd placed the toy without a sound. "Loretta, where did you say Audley works?" "County," my mother said breezily. "She cleans, same as always." "Which department?" The question was strange enough that a few people glanced over. My mother frowned. "I don't know, Colleen. The floors. It's cleaning." Colleen kept looking at me. "In the spring," she said, still slow, still working something out in real time. "I had my surgery. You remember. I don't tell people much about it because it scared me more than I let on. It was bad at the end. There was bleeding they didn't expect." She pressed a hand flat to her own stomach without seeming to know she did it. "I was going under, and there was a woman leaning over me, a surgeon. I never saw her face, just her eyes, and she had these—" Colleen looked at my hands again. She held my hand for a second before they put me out, and she said, "I've got you, Colleen. Go to sleep." And I did, and I woke up. The table had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the party quiet, a held-breath quiet. "Colleen, honestly," my mother said with a little laugh. "What's that got to do with anything?" "I don't know," Colleen said softly, still looking at me. "You just have very steady hands, Audley, for a woman who mops." I could have ended it right there. I felt the whole thing swing open in front of me like a door, and all I had to do was walk through it and say her name and let Colleen see. But I didn't, and I'll tell you why. Because it's the center of everything I am. I didn't want to win by being recognized. I have spent my whole life being told that I am only worth what I can prove, that love is a thing you earn by being useful or brilliant enough, and some stubborn part of me refused, even then, to make my mother love me by dazzling her. So I looked back at Colleen and I said gently, "A lot of people have steady hands, Aunt Colleen. I'm glad you're okay." And I watched a light go out of her face, and I hated myself a little for it, and my mother, sensing weakness, moved in for the part that broke me. "You know what?" Loretta said, standing now, glass in hand, warm and terrible. "I think tonight's actually a good night for this. Audley, I want you to do something for your sister, in front of everybody." She smiled at Diane, then at me. "I want you to apologize to Diane." The room stilled. "Apologize?" I said. "For the jealousy. 4 years of it. For that little comment about the photo being half true. We all heard it, honey. It was ugly. Diane worked her whole life for this, and you can't stand to let her have one night." My mother's voice thickened. And the awful thing, the thing you have to understand, is that she believed it. She had told herself this story so many times, it had become the only true thing in the room to her. She saved a man's life, Ottilie. What have you ever done? The least you can do, the very least, is stand up and tell your sister you're sorry for being jealous of a hero. 19 faces turned to me, waiting, and I felt it, the old undertow, the one that had walked me to the wine bottle an hour ago. Stand up, apologize, give her the ending she wants, keep the peace, close the door softly. I have closed so many doors softly. My whole life is a hallway of doors I closed without a sound so that no one could accuse me of slamming. My phone buzzed again, the second time. Insistent. Somewhere a person was bleeding and a resident was scared, and the chain of command was reaching for me while my mother demanded I apologize for existing. I stood up. My mother's face relaxed into triumph. She thought she'd won. She thought I was standing to apologize. And Diane? Diane looked up at me from her seat with an expression I will remember until I die. Not triumph, not the golden child collecting her due. My sister looked up at me with her eyes brimming and her chin trembling, and she gave the smallest shake of her head, side to side, a tiny helpless motion that meant don't, or meant I'm sorry, or meant both. And I understood in that moment that my sister was not the villain of this story. My mother was. Diane was just a girl who'd been handed a crown as a child and had spent her whole life terrified of the day someone would prove it wasn't hers. Ottilie, my mother said, we're waiting. I opened my mouth, the whole room leaned in, and my phone buzzed a third time, and this time I reached into my bag and took it out, because a man's life does not wait for my mother's theater, and I looked at the screen, and everyone at the table saw the light of it on my face, and I answered it. This is Fletcher, I said. You have to understand what it does to a room when the person everyone has decided is nothing suddenly speaks in a voice they've never heard. This is Fletcher, I said into the phone. And I stood up from my mother's table and walked 3 steps toward the hall, one finger in my other ear to block the party, and the whole room watched me go with their mouths half open, because the voice that came out of me was not the voice of the daughter who refills the ice. It was flat and fast and absolutely without fear, and some animals know the sound of an authority before they can name it. Slow down, I said. Who's the surgeon of record? Okay, put them on. No, put them on now. My mother said, Ottilie, we are in the middle of a... I held up one hand. Not rude, just final. The kind of hand a person raises when a life outranks a party. And something in the flatness of it made my mother's sentence die in her throat. In 41 years, I had never once told my mother to wait. I told her to wait with the flat of my hand, and I did not even look at her while I did it. This is the chief, I said into the phone. Talk to me. Age? Mechanism? What's the pressure doing? A pause while I listened, and I could feel 19 people not breathing behind me, and I could feel my sister's eyes on the back of my neck like heat. Okay, listen to me. You're not going to lose him. Stop chasing the bleeding. Pack all 4 quadrants, top down, and get a hand on the aorta above the injury. Yes, you can. Put your fist here. I pressed my own free hand flat to my abdomen, demonstrating to a person 40 minutes away who couldn't see it, the way you do when your body has done a thing 10,000 times and the knowledge lives in the muscle. Good. Is it slowing? Then it's slowing. Breathe. I'm going to stay right here until the attending scrubs in. You are doing this correctly. Behind me, someone whispered, The chief? I kept my back to them. That was mercy, honestly. I let the room have its slow motion collapse without me watching. I stayed on the phone, and I talked a terrified second year through the worst 10 minutes of their young life, and I did it in my mother's dining room, in an apron I'd already untied, next to a toy mop with a bow on it, and a cake that said, Our Hero. And I was, for those 10 minutes, more myself than I had been at any point in that house since I was 14 years old. The attending scrubbing? Good. Hand it off clean. Tell them Fletcher said the short gastrics, that's where these hide. A beat. No, you did well. That's exactly what I'd have wanted. Call me back if it turns. Yes. Good night. I lowered the phone. I turned around. 19 people were looking at me the way you look at a stranger who has walked into your house wearing your sister's face. My Uncle Boyd had stopped mid-laugh an hour ago and never restarted. His mouth was just open now, empty. Preston had straightened up off Diane's chair. Preston's father was staring at me with the specific, recalculating expression of a man who prides himself on always knowing the most important person in the room and has just discovered he got it catastrophically wrong. And my mother was smiling. Still, because my mother could not yet let herself understand it, and a mind that cannot afford the truth will reach for any smaller story that lets it keep breathing. "Well," Loretta said with a bright, brittle laugh, "aren't we fancy on the phone? Playing doctor now, Ottilie? Is that a new job? Answering phones at the hospital?" She looked around the table, gathering her audience back. "She's always been a good little actress. When she was 9, she used to—" "Mom," Diane's voice, not soft this time. Diane had stood up, her cream dress, her hero's glow, and her face wet and open and wrecked. She was holding the edge of the table like the floor had tilted. "Mom, stop talking," Diane said. "Please, for once in your life, stop talking." The room swung to my sister. "Nobody tells Loretta to stop talking. Nobody ever has except me, and I did it by leaving." "Diane, sweetheart, sit down. You've had a lot of wine." "I know that voice," Diane said. She wasn't looking at our mother. She was looking at me, and her chin was going, and the tears were coming faster than she could blink them back. "I've been hearing that voice for 4 months, on the overnight line. This is Fletcher. Slow down. You're not going to lose him." Her breath hitched. "I've called that voice from the worst nights of my life, and I never—" She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "I never once, not once, thought—" "Diane," I said quietly, "you don't have to do this here." "Yes, I do." She laughed, a terrible, wet, broken laugh. "Yes, I do, because they're about to make you apologize to me, and I would rather die than let that happen, because Ottilie—" And here my sister's voice cracked all the way down the middle. "The man in that photograph. The man everybody's been toasting me for. The man I saved." The room held its breath. "I didn't save him," Diane said. "I didn't save him," Diane said again, louder, so the whole room would have to carry it. 3 weeks ago, at 2 a.m, a man came in off the highway, and he started dying on my table, and I could not stop it. I was alone. I was a second year, and I was in over my head, and he was going, and I called the one number you can call when you're drowning. And a voice answered on the first ring and said, "This is Fletcher." She was crying openly now, and she wasn't wiping it, and something about a grown woman letting the whole family watch her cry without hiding it made the room very still. "The chief came down," Diane said, "in under 2 minutes. In half-tied shoes, I found out later, because she'd run. And she found the bleeder I couldn't find. It was hiding behind the spleen, exactly where I'd never have looked. And she clamped it, and then she put her hands over mine and taught me how to fix it while she did it. And then she stepped back and let me finish so that it would be mine, so that I would learn. And then she said—" Diane's voice broke completely, and she looked at me. She said, "You're going to be a real surgeon." And she went back upstairs, and I never saw her face, and I have felt like a liar for 21 days. She turned to the room, to the newspaper on the easel, to the cake. "There is your hero," Diane said, and she pointed, not at herself, at me. She ran down the stairs. I just held the clamp she handed me. Silence, the kind you could drown in. My mother's knuckles went white around her glass. I have to tell you about my mother's face, because I'd never seen it do this before. My whole life, I've watched Loretta manage a room, soften it, steer it, turn a knife with a smile. Now, for the first time, she was losing one, and she did not have a tool for it, and so she reached for the only thing she had left, which was volume. "That's a lie," she said. Diane, you're confused. You've had wine. This Ottilie has cleaned floors her whole life. She dropped out. She left this family. She has never—" My mother's voice was climbing, cracking at the edges. "She has never done a single thing but disappoint me, and now she's going to walk in here and steal your night with some story about a phone call?" "Loretta." Aunt Colleen was on her feet now, too. Quiet, but on her feet. "The woman who operated on me in April was named Fletcher, the chief. I asked for her name after, to send a card, and they told me, Dr. Fletcher. I never sent it because I was embarrassed to say how scared I'd been." She looked at me, and her eyes were wet. "It was you. I've got you, Colleen. Go to sleep. It was you." "It was a coincidence of names," my mother snapped. "Fletcher is a common—" "Mom," Diane again. "It's her married name. Sam. She married Sam Fletcher 11 years ago. You didn't go to the wedding." Diane wiped her face with the flat of her hand, the exact gesture I make, the gesture I'd forgotten we shared. You didn't go to the wedding, so you never learned her name. So when it showed up over your daughter's head on a schedule, you didn't recognize your own child. None of us did, because you told us our whole lives, that Ottilie was the one who mopped floors. And here it was, the awful hinge of the whole night, swinging into the light. Because my mother had built a story so complete, so often repeated, so useful, that it had made me invisible inside my own family. She had not failed to recognize a stranger. She had failed to recognize her daughter because she had spent 23 years painting over her. She does mop floors, my mother said, weaker now, grasping. She told me. She said she cleans at the hospital. I did clean at the hospital, I said. It was the first thing I'd said in minutes, and the room turned to me like a field of flowers to the sun. When I was 14, I said, you needed the electric bill paid, and Diane needed ballet, so I got a job on the cleaning crew at County. I mopped the operating rooms overnight, between cases, from 14 to 18. That part is true, Mom. I did mop floors. I mopped that exact floor. I kept my voice level, because level was the only weapon I'd ever needed against her, and because I meant every word and didn't want the meaning smudged by heat. And then I went to college on the money I saved doing it, and I went to medical school on loans I'm still paying, and I did a residency and a fellowship in trauma surgery, and 4 months ago I became chief of surgery at the hospital system that owns the very building where I used to push a mop at 2 a.m. I clean up messes for a living. You were right about that. You were just wrong about the size of them. Nobody laughed. The little pink mop sat on the table with its bow, and it wasn't funny anymore. It was just sad, a small, ugly monument to how badly a mother can misjudge a child on purpose. Preston sat down slowly, as though his legs had made the decision without him. I watched the prestige he'd married drain out of his face and reorganize itself around a new center of gravity. And I felt sorry for Diane, actually, because she was about to find out how much of that man had been in love with a headline. Boyd cleared his throat. My uncle, who'd been telling the story of the article as though he'd co-authored it, who'd co-signed loans and dined out on My Niece the Surgeon for years. Now hang on, he said. Hang on, so the article, the paper, that was a resident getting appropriate credit for a save she was part of, I said. It's how teaching hospitals work, Boyd. I didn't correct it because building Diane up is literally my job, and because I did not need the Belhaven Courier. I let that sit. I didn't come here tonight to take anything from my sister. I came because Mom asked me to, and because some idiot part of me still shows up when she calls. I was going to carry the ice and drive home and let you all keep your hero. That was the plan. I looked at my mother. The plan changed, I said, when you handed me a toy mop and asked me to apologize for being jealous of a life you don't actually know anything about. It didn't stop with Colleen. That's the thing about a lie that stood for 23 years. When it finally goes, it doesn't crack in one place. It goes everywhere at once, and everyone in the room starts remembering. Cousin Renata put her hand over her mouth. Renata, who'd passed my birthday envelopes to Diane for years, who I'd used as a quiet courier because she was the one relative who never asked questions. The money, she said, half to herself. Ottilie, the birthday money. You told me to say it was from a friend. That was, all those years, that was you? On a cleaning paycheck? She started to cry, which surprised me because Renata is not a crier. You paid for Diane's Sweet 16 dress out of a cleaning paycheck, and you let Loretta tell everyone you'd forgotten her birthday. It didn't matter who got the credit, I said. Diane got the dress. It mattered, Renata said fiercely. It mattered, Ottilie. Then Preston's father cleared his throat. I'd been waiting for him, honestly. He's a hospital foundation donor, the kind of man who buys a table at the gala and expects to be thanked from the podium. He'd been staring at me for 2 full minutes with the particular horror of a man who is never wrong about status and has just discovered he's been wrong all night. The Founders Gala, he said slowly. In the spring, they gave an award to the incoming chief of surgery for the trauma outcomes. I shook her hand. He looked at me like I was a photograph developing in front of him. I shook your hand. I told my wife the new chief was the most impressive person in the room. And then I came to this party and I watched you carry ice for 2 hours and I thought... He stopped, because whatever he'd thought did not survive being said out loud in front of his son's fiancée and her mother. You thought I was the help, I said. It's all right. So did everyone. Preston had gone very quiet. I watched him look at his father, and then at Diane, and then at me, and I watched the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. The realization that the surgeon in the family wasn't the woman he'd proposed to, that the truly formidable person at this table was the one in the apron, and that he'd spent the evening a foot away from someone he'd have crossed a ballroom to impress. Diane saw him do it. She's not stupid, my sister. She filed it away. She'd deal with Preston later. And she did. But that's her story to tell. My niece with the phone was still reading off the screen, unable to stop herself. It says she trained at... And there's a thing here. A whole article. Regional trauma outcomes improved under new leadership. And there's a quote from the CEO... She looked up, stricken. How did none of us know this? It's right here. It's been right here the whole time. And that was the sentence that finally reached my mother. Not my speech, not Diane's confession. It's been right here the whole time, because it had. I hadn't hidden behind a fake name in another state. I'd come home. I'd taken the biggest job in the region under my own married name, 40 minutes from her door, and put my face on a hospital website and a gala program and a newspaper's business page. And the reason not one of them knew was not that I'd concealed it. It was that they'd never once looked, because my mother had told them so many times and for so many years that there was nothing about Ottilie worth looking at. That curiosity itself had died. She hadn't buried me. She'd convinced an entire family I wasn't worth digging for. My mother stood frozen under the hour hero cake, with 19 people slowly turning toward the truth around her, and I watched the certainty go out of her the way blood goes out of a field. Not all at once, but faster than you'd think, and past the point where anyone can put it back. "Ottilie," she said. And for one single second, I thought she was going to say the thing, my name, and then the other thing, the thing I'd waited 41 years for. She didn't. Of course she didn't. What she said was, "You've ruined Diane's party." And that, after everything, almost made me laugh. My mother did not cry. I want you to know that because you might expect her to, and she didn't. My mother got angry, which is what she does with grief, has always done, will always do. "You think you're better than me now," she said. Her voice had dropped into something low and shaking. "Is that it? You come into my house, with your steady hands and your chief of whatever, and you humiliate me in front of my whole family." "I answered a phone," I said. "You planned this." She was pointing at me, her finger trembling. "You've been sitting on this, waiting, You let me hand you that mop. You let me stand up and ask you to apologize. You could have said something the second you walked in, and instead you let me make a fool of myself so it would be worse." Her eyes were bright and furious, and underneath, terrified. "That's cruel, Ottilie. That is a cruel thing to do to your mother. And the worst part is she wasn't entirely wrong, and I knew it, and I made myself say the true thing anyway. I didn't plan it," I said. "But you're right that I let you keep going. I've been letting you keep going my whole life, Mom. I let you tell people I cleaned floors. I let you skip my wedding. I let you build Diane into a monument on top of me, and I never once stood up, because I learned when I was very small that the only way to survive you was to disappear, and I got so good at disappearing that I disappeared from my own family for 23 years. I kept my voice level. Level was the only inheritance she'd left me that was worth anything. So no, I didn't plan this, but I'm not going to apologize for it either. After everything I sacrificed," she started. "You sacrificed for Diane," I said, "not for me. I was the one you sacrificed." That landed. I saw it land. And for 1/2 second, I thought I saw the whole thing crack open in her, the real thing under the anger, and out it came, in a voice I'd never heard her use. "You want to know about sacrifice?" she said. "I had an older brother. Did you know that? My father put everything into Wallace. Everything. The good schools, the car, the down payment on his first house, and me." Her laugh was awful. I was the girl. I was there to help. I fetched and I cleaned and I stayed useful, and I watched my father look right through me for 40 years, and when he died, he left it all to Wallace, and I got the sewing machine. The sewing machine, Ottilie. Her chin was shaking now, and I understood, in a rush of nausea, exactly where I'd come from. So I swore that one of my children was going to be somebody the world couldn't look through. I swore I'd make one of you undeniable. The room was silent. Even Boyd had gone gray, because Boyd was the baby of that family too. The younger brother who'd watched their father hand Wallace the world. And some part of this was landing on him. So you picked Diane, I said softly, and you made me the girl. You made me your father. I made you strong, she hissed. You made me invisible, I said. You did to me exactly what he did to you, and you knew it hurt, because you'd felt it. That's the part I can't get past, Mom. You knew, better than anyone alive, what it feels like to be the child who's there to fetch and stay useful and be looked through. You felt it your whole life. And then you turned around and did it to me on purpose, because you needed a shadow to make Diane's light look brighter. I let the breath out slowly. You didn't fail to see me. You chose not to. Every single day, for 41 years. She had no volume left for that. She sat down. She sat down hard in her chair at the head of the table, under the Our Hero cake, next to the framed photograph, and for the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to say. I looked around the table then, at all of them. The aunts and the cousins and Preston's recalculating parents and my Uncle Boyd with his open, empty face. For the record, I said, so nobody has to whisper about it in the car on the way home. Yes, I'm a surgeon. I'm the chief of surgery. 3 weeks ago, a man came off the highway dying, and I'm the reason he isn't dead. And I let my sister have the headline because that is my actual job, and because I love her, even though she laughed tonight, even though she spent her whole life on the pedestal that was built by standing on me. My voice didn't rise. It never had to. And I still mop floors. I mop the operating room floor before every single case, on my knees, because a clean field saves lives, and I don't ask anyone to do a thing I won't do myself. So when my mother says one daughter saves lives and the other one mops floors, I looked at Loretta, small now in her chair. She's describing the same daughter, I said. She just never bothered to find out. What happens to a room after something like that is not dramatic. It's small, and it's 100 tiny betrayals of the person who used to run it, and it's worse than shouting. Boyd was the first. My uncle set down his coffee cup and would not look at his sister. You told me she dropped out, he said to my mother, and his voice was thick. Loretta, I bragged about the wrong niece for 4 months. I stood in my own church and told people my niece the surgeon, and I meant— He stopped. He looked at me, and something crumpled in his weathered face. I owe you an apology I don't know how to make. You don't owe me anything, Boyd, I said, and I meant it, because I was too tired to collect debts. Preston's mother leaned across and murmured something to Preston's father, and the two of them did the thing that money does, which is quietly, instantly, resort the room by a new hierarchy. I watched Preston himself look at Diane, my sister, still standing, still wet-faced, no longer glowing, just human, and I watched him try to decide whether he'd propose to a surgeon or to a woman, and I watched Diane watch him decide, and I thought, my sister is going to have her own long night after this one. The cousins whispered. One of the younger ones, a niece with a phone already in her hand, said too loud, Oh my God, she's on the hospital website, chief of surgery. There's a photo. And 3 people leaned toward the little screen to see my face where it had been the whole time. Public, findable, if any of them had ever once been curious enough to look. That's the thing that undid my mother more than anything I said. Not that I'd hidden, that I hadn't, that I'd been right there, one search away, for 4 months, and not one of them had thought the floor mopper worth a search. And through all of it, my mother sat under the cake and said nothing, and got smaller, and I felt— I'll be honest with you, because I promised you honest— I felt no triumph. I'd imagined this moment for 23 years, some version of it, the moment they'd all know, and now that it was here, it just tasted like dust. Because the thing I'd actually wanted was never for them to know I was important. It was for my mother to look at me, just once, before she had to, and see me. And that was the one thing that was never going to happen. Not tonight, not with a headline, not with a save, not ever. You cannot make a person see you by being undeniable. I know that now. I built an undeniable life, and my mother still needed a stranger to say chief of surgery out loud before she'd look at me, and even then she looked at me like an intruder. Then the phone rang. The other phone, the double pulse against my hip. I took it out, and the room flinched at the sound now, and I looked at the screen, and it was the case from earlier, the callback, and I answered it with the whole family watching. Fletcher. I listened. My face changed. They were all learning to read my face now, learning it 3 weeks and 23 years too late. And what they read was that it had turned, the case had turned, the man was going back to the OR, and the attending wanted the chief. "I'm 40 minutes out," I said. "Start without me. I'll scrub in when I get there. Don't wait on me for the aorta." I was already reaching for my bag. "Yes, now, go." I hung up. I stood. "I have to go," I said, to no one, to all of them. "Somebody's dying and it's my job." And that was the asymmetric part, the part I didn't engineer and couldn't have. I didn't get to deliver a closing speech. I didn't get to watch my mother suffer. I got a phone call, because that's my life, because while my family was arranging a party to decide I was nothing, I was the person a hospital calls when a man is bleeding to death at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. I picked up my bag. I left the toy mop on the table. I left the Our Hero cake and the framed photograph and the 19 people rearranging everything they thought they knew. I was at the door when Diane caught me. "Ottilie!" She had her shoes in her hand. Her mascara was ruined. She looked 12 years old and 40 years old at the same time, the way people do when a thing they've carried their whole life finally sets itself down. "Take me with you." "Diane, you don't have to—" "I'm a surgical resident," she said, and something almost like a laugh got through the tears. "And there's a man going back to the OR, and my chief is my sister, and I have spent 21 days feeling like a fraud, and I would very much like to go be useful for real." She swallowed. "Please, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to be the hero. I want to go scrub in next to you and learn how to find the bleeder behind the spleen." Behind her, my mother's voice, thin and lost. Diane, you're not going with her. Diane, come back and sit down." My sister didn't turn around. "Good night, Mom," she said. And she followed me out into the dark, both of us leaving the party our mother had built to shame me, and neither of us closed the door softly. For once in my life, I let it stand wide open behind me, and the warm light spilled out onto the porch and lit up nothing but the two of us walking away from it. Diane got in on the passenger side, and we pulled out of Bellhaven onto the dark highway, and for the first few miles neither of us said anything. It's a strange thing to sit in a car with a sister you've lost. She was a stranger with a face I'd known since she was born. She broke first. "I laughed," Diane said, staring at the windshield. "When Mom said it, the other one mops floors." "I laughed, Ottilie. I want to tell you I didn't, but you were there. You saw me. And I need you to know that I've hated myself for it since the second it came out." "I know," I said. "That's not— I know isn't—" She pressed her hands between her knees. "Can I just say the whole thing? I've been building it for 3 weeks, and if I don't say it now, I'll lose my nerve like I did at the table." "Say the whole thing." She took a breath. "I've known something was wrong since that night in the OR. The way Fletcher moved, the way she found the bleeder, like she already knew the man's body. And afterward, you're going to be a real surgeon. Nobody talks to a resident like that, except somebody who wants the resident to win more than they want to win themselves." And I lay awake and I thought, who does that? Who runs down 2 flights in the middle of the night and hands you the save and disappears? And some part of me— Her voice dropped. "Some part of me knew the shape of it. It felt like being taken care of by someone who'd been taking care of me my whole life. And I didn't let myself finish the thought, because if I finished it, I'd have to look at everything." The highway lines ticked past. I kept my eyes on them. My hands did not shake. "When I was little," Diane said, "they told me you were the smart one who went bad, the one who was jealous and left and broke Mom's heart. And I believed it because I was 6 and I needed my crown to be real. And then I got older, and I started to notice that the story didn't hold, that you sent me $100 for my 16th birthday through Cousin Renata, even though Mom said you'd forgotten. That when I got into med school there was a card, no name, that said, 'I'm proud of you, keep your hands steady.' I kept it. I keep it in my badge holder. I had no idea it was you. I've been carrying your handwriting against my chest for 6 years, and I thought it was from a stranger." I had to breathe carefully for a second. I hadn't known she'd kept it. "I did not have a good childhood, Ottilie," she said. "And I know that's an insane thing to say when you're the one who got mopped over. but being the monument is its own kind of prison. I have been terrified my entire life, terrified that the day would come when everyone found out I wasn't the genius, I was just the one Mom chose. I have never once felt like a real doctor. Every case I'm waiting to be exposed. And it turns out the thing I was most afraid of, that my whole legend was built on someone else, was true. Except the someone else is my sister, who I was told to look down on, and who has apparently been quietly saving my life from the shadows since before I could drive. "You're a good resident," I said. "That's not a legend. You did the closing that night. Your hands were fine once someone stopped the drowning. That's real. You're going to be a real surgeon, and I said it because it's true, not to be kind." She cried at that quietly, and I let her, and I did not tell her it was okay because it wasn't, not yet, but it could be, and that's a different and better thing than okay. "Can I know you?" she asked when she could talk again. "Not the chief, you. I don't know anything. I don't know your husband. I don't know if you have kids. I don't know your... I found out your middle name off the hospital website tonight. I'm 36 years old, and I read my sister's middle name off a website." "Ophelia," I said. "It's Ophelia. Mom wanted something that sounded like it belonged to a better family." "Oddly, Ophelia," a wet laugh. "She really did want us to be somebody." "She wanted one of us to be somebody," I said. "That's the whole tragedy of her. She only had room for one." "Then she was wrong," Diane said, fierce suddenly, turning in her seat, "because there are two of us, and one of them is a chief of surgery who paid for the other one's birthday out of a cleaning paycheck, and if she couldn't make room for both of us, that's her failure, not yours. It was never yours." She wiped her face. "I'm going to spend a long time making this right. I don't know how yet, but I'm not going back to that table. I picked you. In the car, right now, I'm picking you." And there it was. The thing I'd wanted my whole life, the thing I'd told you no headline could buy. It didn't come from my mother. It came from the sister I'd been taught to resent, in a dark car doing 70 down the highway toward a man who needed us both. Somebody looked at me and picked me. It turns out that's all the wound ever was, not a need to be important. A need to be chosen, once, by someone who knew the whole truth and stayed. "Okay," I said. My voice wasn't quite level for once, and I let it not be. "Okay, then let's go save this guy, and then I'll tell you everything. Start with the aorta. Tell me what you'd do." And Diane sat up and wiped her face one last time and started telling me, and by the time we hit the hospital exit, she wasn't crying anymore. She was a surgeon prepping for a case, and her hands, when she held them up in the wash of the streetlights, were steady. I'd like to think she got that from me. The man on the table was named on the board as a trauma number, but I knew who he was before I saw the chart, because there aren't two highway pileups with a splenic bleed in 1 month in a town this size. It was him, the man from the article, the man my sister was toasted for saving 3 weeks ago. He'd been discharged, and he'd thrown a clot, and now he was back and bleeding again, and the universe apparently has a sense of symmetry that would embarrass a screenwriter. "It's the same patient," Diane said, reading the chart over my shoulder, her voice going strange. "Oddly, it's him." "I know," I said, already scrubbing, "so let's not lose him twice." Here is the thing nobody outside an operating room understands about what we do. It is not glamorous. It is not the photograph. It is a cold, bright room and a checklist and 100 small, unheroic disciplines. And the first of them, before I ever touch a patient, is that I look at the floor. I've done it since I was 14 with a mop in my hand, and I do it now with a scalpel in my hand. And it is the same instinct. A clean field, a controlled space, nothing underfoot that can make a steady person stumble. I checked the floor. I checked the counts. I checked my resident, whose eyes above her mask were scared but not drowning this time, because this time she wasn't alone. "You're going to find the bleeder," I told her. "Oddly." "Dr. Vane," I said, and I let the room hear the correction. Let the scrub techs and the attending and the anesthesiologist hear the chief call this resident by her title. "You're going to find it. Behind the spleen, short gastrics, the place you'd never look. Except now you know to look there, because 3 weeks ago you watched someone find it. So find it. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And I watched my sister put her hands into a dying man and go still in the way you have to go still, the way I've been still my whole life. And I watched her find the bleeder, The same vessel. The clot had torn it open again. And I watched her clamp it, alone, with her own hands, while I stood at her shoulder and did nothing but breathe steady so she could borrow my calm until she grew her own. "Got it," she whispered. "Ottilie, I've got it." "Yeah," I said, "you do. Now repair it. Take your time. He's got all night, and so do we." She repaired it. It took her longer than it would have taken me, and it was perfect. And when the pressure came up on the monitor and held, the anesthesiologist said, "Nice work," to the room, and meant it for her. And Diane looked up at me over her mask with her eyes shining. And this time, this is the part I'll keep instead of the toy mop. This time when a man lived, the credit was actually hers, earned in front of witnesses, with her sister standing beside her, instead of hidden in the shadow of the story. We closed him together. I let her drive it. When it was done and he was breathing on his own and headed to recovery, we stood at the scrub sink washing the long night off our hands, and Diane looked down at the water running pink off her fingers and started to laugh, exhausted and amazed. "I used to think," she said, "that you and I were nothing alike. Mom told me that so many times. You're my Diane, you're not like her. And I'm standing here looking at our hands and they're the exact same hands." "They're Mom's hands, actually," I said. "The good thing she gave both of us and never noticed she'd given twice." We walked out into the gray light before dawn. There's a specific tiredness after a save, a clean, empty feeling, like a floor that's just been mopped. Diane bought us both terrible coffee from the machine in the surgical lounge, and we sat in the plastic chairs and, as promised, I told her everything. Sam. The loans, the courthouse wedding with 2 witnesses from the surgical floor, the 14-hour days, the night I sat in the parking garage and cried when I heard she'd gotten into medical school, because I was proud and gutted at the same time and had no one to tell. She listened to all of it like a person drinking after a long thirst, and she asked questions, and she wrote my husband's name on her hand so she wouldn't forget it. And somewhere around the second cup, she reached over and took my hand and just held it, my rough, steady hand in her rough, steady one. The hands our mother gave us both and only ever counted once. "She's going to call you," Diane said. "Mom, eventually, when the aunts start asking why her surgeon daughter doesn't come around, she's going to call and she's going to make it sound like she's doing you a favor." "I know. What are you going to do?" I thought about it. I thought about 23 years of doors closed softly and a toy mop with a bow, and my mother's face when she said you're describing the same daughter had finally cracked her certainty, and how even then, even cracked, she'd reached for anger instead of my name. "I'm going to answer," I said, "because I'm still her daughter, and that doesn't switch off, and I'm too old to pretend it does. But I'm not going to carry the ice anymore, and I'm never going to apologize for existing again. She can have a daughter, or she can have a shadow. She doesn't get to keep casting me as both. It's been a few weeks now, and here's what the wind down looks like, since the aftermath is where the real cards get turned over." My mother called, exactly like Diane said she would. She made it sound like forgiveness. "I've decided we can put all this behind us, Ottilie," as if the mop had been my crime. I answered because I meant it when I said that doesn't switch off, but I didn't carry the ice. "I'd love to see you, Mom," I told her. "Come to the hospital. Ask for the chief." She hasn't come. She still can't say the word out loud, even now, even knowing. Some people would rather keep the story than keep the child. I've stopped waiting for her to choose differently, and it turns out the waiting was the heaviest thing I carried. Boyd drove 2 hours to apologize to my face, and did it badly, and it counted anyway. Colleen finally sent the card, 6 months late, and I keep it on my desk. The man from the highway walked out on his own feet, and doesn't know either of our names, which is exactly how it should be. And Diane calls every Sunday. She's off the pedestal, and she's lighter for it. She keeps a card in her badge holder that says, "Keep your hands steady," and now she knows whose handwriting it is. Last week she found the bleeder behind the spleen on her own, no chief in the room, and she called me after just to say it out loud to someone who'd understand. Somebody chose me. It turns out that was the whole wound, and it healed from a direction I never watched. Here's what I know now, if it's any use to you. Your worth was never the label someone else pinned on you to make themselves look taller. The people who are quick to decide you're the one who mops floors have usually never once looked at what's in your hands. My mother said one daughter saves lives and the other one mops floors. She was right. I do both. I still mop the operating room floor before every single case on my knees in the quiet before the lights come up. Right before I pick up the knife. If you've ever been the shadow someone else's light was built on, stay a second longer. Hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, who finally saw you? I'll be reading. Take care of yourself. I've got you.